Get the hell away from this table, you piece of trash! Darius, throw her out onto the street. What? What the hell are you doing?
She pulled her phone from the pocket of her jacket, and he was going to regret everything he had done to the black woman he thought was powerless. On Saturday morning, Halcyon Cafe on Pine Avenue had been open for nearly an hour when Kendra Walsh walked in. Outside, Seattle still wore a thin layer of rain over car windows and sidewalks. Inside, warm yellow light fell across dark wooden tables, the smell of fresh roasted coffee mixed with the grinder's hum and spoons tapping against cups. It was the kind of place people came to be seen: leather chairs, green plants, abstract art, employees in black aprons, and a back area often rented out by tech people for private meetings. Kendra didn't look around for long. She walked straight to the corner table by the window, the one she had sat at every Saturday morning for 5 years. Her khaki jacket was faded at the elbows, the collar slightly frayed. Her hair was tied low, not styled, with no careful makeup. There was no watch on her wrist. The gray athletic backpack under her feet had one worn strap, the kind of bag many people would assume belonged to a gym trainer or a mother who had just come back from the store. She didn't set her phone on the table, old habit. In the military, something kept out of sight was often safer than something displayed in front of you. She simply sat down and wrapped both hands on a cup of unsweetened black coffee a server had brought almost the moment she walked in. The young server, Mila, was the only person in the cafe who knew her in any sense. Not her full name, not her company, not her past. Only that this woman came in like clockwork, always drank black coffee, always tipped twice the price of the cup, and had never said her name. Kendra liked that. She didn't come to Halcyon to be recognized. She came because the window corner looking out at the rain-slick hill made it easier to breathe. On Saturday mornings, with no meetings, no risk reports, no electronic signatures, she allowed herself to sit like a normal person, or at least as close to normal as her life still knew how to be. On that cup of black coffee was a taste she had learned from the days of marching, bitter, hot, needing no softening. She drank slowly, eyes on the people moving outside. Some people thought plainness was proof of lack. Kendra knew it could be a choice. After years of living with helicopters, sand, hot metal, and blood, she didn't need expensive clothes to prove she existed. Around 9:40, the rhythm of the cafe changed. The door opened harder than usual. A group of 5 walked in, led by Xander Croft, 35 years old, CEO of Croft Technologies, a familiar face in Seattle business magazines. He wore an expensive wool coat, a white shirt open at the top 2 buttons, and a diamond ring that tapped lightly against his phone, as if every surface around him were a control panel. Behind Xander came 4 young employees, holding laptops and folders, their eyes always waiting for a signal from him before they moved. Last came Darius Cole, head bodyguard, almost 2 meters tall. His frame so large the glass doorway seemed smaller when he stepped through. Darius didn't speak. He scanned the cafe by professional instinct, noting the exits, cameras, and crowded tables, and then his eyes slid over Kendra by the window without stopping. Kendra didn't look closely either. She had met too many men like Xander to need to classify him again. People who walked into a room already believing the room was missing them. People who used volume as a measure of power. People who mistook everyone stepping aside for respect. The back area of the cafe had no reserved sign that day. Halcyon hadn't put up a rope, and no company name card sat on the tables. But Xander saw Kendra sitting near the area he wanted to use and instantly treated her presence as misplaced. He stopped a few steps from her table, looked at the old jacket, the worn backpack, and the black coffee, then placed his hand on the tabletop. His ring knocked once against the wood. He said he had booked the whole section and she was sitting in the wrong place. Kendra looked up, not hurried, not shrinking. She glanced past his shoulder toward the counter, where Mila stood frozen with a rag in her hand. No sign, no notice. No one from the cafe had asked her to move, so Kendra said she didn't see any sign saying that. That small answer made Xander laugh. Not because it was funny, but because for the first time that morning, the obstacle in front of him didn't automatically disappear. He leaned down, lowered his voice, and asked what that ragged jacket gave her the right to sit here. The 4 employees behind him looked away. No one wanted to become too clear a witness. Kendra didn't answer. She lifted her coffee and took a sip. Bitter, hot, normal. That normalness was what made Xander lose control. The slap came fast, straight, and bigger than the sound it made. His hand cut across the table and struck Kendra's right cheek. The coffee cup slipped from her hand, hit the edge of the table, then cracked in half. Black coffee ran across the wood and soaked into the sleeve of her old jacket in slow stains like ink. The cafe froze. The grinder stopped mid-cycle. A man at the bar held a spoon suspended above his cup. Mila covered her mouth with both hands. Darius shifted his weight slightly but didn't step yet. Kendra didn't fall, didn't yell, didn't raise a hand to her face. Her skin burned, her jaw hot and tight, her eyes wanting to blink faster. But she had learned long ago that the first reaction was often what the person hitting you wanted to own. If she shouted, they'd call her out of control. If she cried, they'd call her weak. If she jumped to her feet, they'd call her a threat. So she stayed seated and let silence testify. This wasn't the first time someone had judged her by her clothes. Not the first time a room had looked at her and decided she was smaller than she really was. In Kendra's life, someone had once mistaken her for a delivery worker inside her own company's office. Someone had once asked who let her into a security conference. Someone had looked at her skin, hair, jacket, and old shoes and felt so certain they didn't need to hear her name. Xander's slap was only the most violent version of the same habit. Xander jerked his chin toward Darius and ordered him to throw her onto the street. His voice was full of the certainty of a man who believed a paycheck had bought someone else's will. Darius stepped forward. He didn't like putting his hands on women, but bodyguard work was often written in short commands and long consequences. He reached out his large hand to grab Kendra's arm, intending to pull her up. Her right sleeve rode up. The tattoo appeared on her forearm. A tilted dagger crossed through a flame, the black ink, old but sharp, sitting right where a thin scar once ran near her wrist. Darius stopped cold as if he had hit an invisible wall. His pupils tightened. The hand holding her arm dropped immediately, so fast a few people thought he had been burned. 8 years is a long time to forget a face through fire and gunpowder, but some symbols don't fade. That tattoo didn't belong to an ordinary unit, and it wasn't the kind of ink young soldiers got to show off. It was the private mark of a small group, etched into the skin of people who had lived through a night no public report would ever describe fully. Darius had last seen it in the red light of a half-burning armored vehicle when a woman dragged him out from under rubble and told him to keep breathing. He took exactly 2 steps back. His heel struck the wooden floor with a clear click. His back straightened like a ruler. A right hand rose to his brow, a full military salute, sharp and solemn, not meant for the crowd and not meant for Xander, only for Kendra. The cafe didn't understand what had just happened, but everyone felt power change direction. The woman who had just been slapped still sat there, jacket soaked with coffee, cheek red. The huge bodyguard Xander had just ordered around now stood at attention like he was in front of a commanding officer. And Xander, for the first second, couldn't find a sentence that fit the new world. He screamed Darius's name. Darius didn't turn his head. Xander stepped closer, his face reddening, asking if Darius was deaf and asking who paid him to protect. Darius kept holding the salute. His silence humiliated Xander more than any protest could have. For Xander, being refused in front of his employees was bad enough. Being refused by the bodyguard he had bought through a contract in front of the whole cafe was something he had no language for. Kendra slowly stood up. She didn't ask Darius to lower his hand, didn't say his name, didn't explain the tattoo. She only tugged her sleeve down a little, not hiding it completely, as if the secret had been revealed just enough. Coffee dripped from the edge of the table to the floor in black drops. Xander pulled out his phone. He called the local police first. His voice loud enough for the whole cafe to hear him say there was a woman causing a disturbance, mentally attacking business clients, and refusing to leave a private area. Right after that, he called Howard Park, chairman of the board at Croft Technologies, and told him to bring lawyers to Halcyon immediately. He said there was an incident that needed to be handled before it was posted online, speaking with the voice of someone who still believed he was controlling the damage. Kendra listened until the last sentence. Then she took her phone from the inside pocket of her jacket. It was the first time the phone appeared on the table. Not the newest model, no shiny case, nothing that signaled power. She opened her contacts and pressed one number. When the person on the other end answered, her voice was so calm that Mila, standing a few feet away, thought she might be ordering another cup of coffee. In that moment, Kendra could hear the smallest sounds clearly: coffee dripping from the edge of the table, steam escaping from the espresso machine, the short breath of a young employee standing behind Xander. She didn't need to look around to know phones had been raised. Public humiliation always found an audience, but rarely did anyone want to be the first to say enough. Kendra thought of Simone for one quick moment. Her daughter was at school for a weekend event, probably still believing her mother had only gone out for coffee like every Saturday. The thought made her keep her voice even lower. Not because Xander deserved that calm, but because Kendra didn't want any action she took afterward to be explained to her daughter as anger. War had taught her that real power wasn't in the first strike back. It was in choosing exactly what to activate at the right time, and letting the rest find its way back to the person who caused it, soon or late without shouting. Kendra told the legal director of K Global Security to activate Clause 14B under the Croft Technologies contract. She would send written confirmation within 1 hour. No explanation, no emphasis, no threat. Just one operational sentence, clean as an execution order. The name Croft Technologies made Xander stop in the middle of scolding Darius. He turned his head. For a fraction of a second, anger left his face and was replaced by caution. K Global Security wasn't a small company. It was the firm protecting Croft's data, physical facilities, logistics chain, and executive security. That contract was the thing he had bragged about to investors for the entire last quarter. He asked what she had just said. This time, his voice wasn't entirely certain anymore. Kendra set the phone down on the table beside the broken cup pieces and the black coffee stain. She looked at him, as calm as she had been when she first walked into the cafe that morning. She asked, "Would you like me to read it back?" No one inside Halcyon moved. Darius was still standing at attention. Xander's 4 employees looked down at the floor. Mila gripped the towel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Outside the glass, Seattle rain kept falling lightly across the sidewalk, so normal it felt absurd. But inside the cafe, with nothing more than a tattoo and a phone call, the man who had slapped a woman because he thought she didn't belong. They began to understand that he may have hit the one person who had the power to pull his entire empire down in silence. 8 years before that morning at Halcyon, Darius Cole had been lying on his back on cracked ground, in a town whose name no longer appeared clearly on the news map. It was a conflict zone, where roads were cut apart by checkpoints, house walls were stained with burn marks, and the sky always seemed to hold dust in the air. His unit hadn't come there to be heroes. They had come to get a group of technical advisors out before the situation turned bad. Everything turned bad sooner than predicted. The first explosion tore open part of the road. The lead vehicle tilted hard to one side, black smokes bursting from underneath. Darius remembered the feeling of air being pulled out of his lungs. Then every sound came back at once. Radios, breaking glass, bullets hitting walls, tires grinding over concrete. He was 32 then, large, strong, and the kind of man people usually placed in front to shield others. He pulled a young teammate out of the vehicle door, shoved him behind a low wall, then turned back to clear the way for the last group. That was when a line of bullets cut across the front, and part of a brick wall beside him collapsed. Darius didn't move fast enough. One bullet tore through his right thigh. His leg gave out. A second later, bricks came down over his hip and lower leg, pinning him to the ground like a giant hand. The pain arrived 1 beat late, then flared so hard everything went white. He tried to push the bricks off, but his body wouldn't listen. Blood soaked through his pants, hot and heavy. The radio on his shoulder still worked in broken pieces. He heard the order to pull out. The commander's voice was tense and clear. "The situation is escalating. All units fall back to the safe rally point." Tactically, it was the right decision. If the whole team stayed behind for one trapped man, they could lose more people. But some decisions that are right on a map feel wrong inside a human being lying there waiting to die. Darius tried to call out. The first time, only a rough sound came out of his throat. The second time, the radio crackled, then went dead. Through the dust, he saw the shadows of teammates retreating, one by one, none of them turning long enough to see him under the fallen wall. They were doing what they had been trained to do too, save the rest of the unit. But to the man pinned to the ground, the difference between being abandoned and being calculated out of the plan was painfully thin. When the last vehicle backed out of the alley entrance, Darius saw a piece of sky through the broken roof. It was strangely pale blue, nothing like the color of war. He told himself that would be the last sky he would ever see. The thought didn't come with a scream. It came calmly, like a stranger sitting beside him and telling the truth. Then he heard an engine coming back. At first, Darius thought it was a hallucination from blood loss. That sound was moving against the order to withdraw, against the direction of survival. A small armored vehicle cut through smoke and dust, braking so hard its rear end slid to the side. The door opened. A woman jumped out, stayed low, and moved fast through the open space between two walls. Kendra Walsh. She was 30 then, commander of a special response team sent to support the withdrawal route. Darius knew her name, knew her voice over the radio, knew the way she spoke so briefly that every sentence sounded like an order stripped of anything unnecessary. He wasn't close to her, but in the military, some people only need to be seen moving through smoke for you to know they won't lie when things get bad. Kendra was that kind of person. She came back alone. No order authorized it. Written into a report, someone could have called it reckless, a break in the withdrawal formation. There was no tactical reason to justify turning around just to drag one man out of rubble. There was only one principle: leave no one behind. Kendra had learned that sentence on her first day in the military. Many people said it like a slogan. For Kendra, it was the last line that let her still recognize who she was. She dropped to her knees beside Darius, checked his leg, checked his pulse, and checked his eye response. He told her to go. The sentence came out, not because he was brave, but because he understood the math. She didn't listen. She only told him to look at her, breathe on her count, and not die before she pulled him up. There are people who make you want to live simply because they order you to live, like it's the only reasonable thing to do. Kendra used the tow cable from the vehicle to hook onto the section of wall, adjusted the angle, then activated the winch herself. Dirt and bricks shook. Darius clenched his teeth so hard he heard his own jaw grind. When the opening was just wide enough, Kendra shoved her arm under his shoulder and pulled. He weighed far more than she did, and gear, blood, and dust made everything slippery. She dragged him a few inches, lost her footing, then pulled again. A piece of metal from the shattered doorframe snapped loose when the vehicle took shrapnel nearby. It sliced across Kendra's right forearm, cutting a long line from below the elbow down near the wrist. Blood ran over her skin immediately. Darius saw her pause for half a second. Only half a second. Then she used that same wounded arm to grab the strap across his chest and pull him free of the last section of brick. Skin closes, scars fade. But Kendra didn't let that one disappear completely. Months later, when the wound was stable enough, she tattooed a dagger crossed over a flame on top of it, not to cover it, to remember one man who made it back, and another man who didn't. That other man was Marcus Walsh. Marcus was her husband. He had been on the same mission. He hadn't been trapped under the same wall as Darius, but he was deeper inside the chaos, where the signal was getting weaker. His voice wasn't dramatic. He only said, "Do it, Ken. Get them out." Darius didn't know all of that in the moment she dragged him into the vehicle. He only saw Kendra shove him into the back, then turn her head toward the other side of town. It was the look of someone who knew part of her soul was still behind her. She listened to the radio. There was only long static, broken calls, and the final withdrawal order repeating. Could Kendra have gone back one more time? That question followed her for a long time. Reason said no. Darius was losing blood. The area was about to be locked down. One more vehicle turning back might have meant no one came home. But grief asked a simpler question. Why did this one come back, and the other one didn't? Kendra drove Darius to the safe rally point. One hand on the wheel, her right arm wrapped in a pressure bandage already turning red. Darius drifted in and out, still hearing her voice telling him not to sleep. He wanted to ask who the other person was. Wanted to ask why she kept looking in the rearview mirror as if she were looking at a place she could never return to. But blood loss pulled him under before he could speak. Marcus didn't come home from that mission. The official news came in carefully written sentences. Lost contact. Unable to recover under safe conditions. Confirmed killed in action. Organizations use formal words because that is the only way large systems can stand in front of loss. But at the military airport, when Simone ran into Kendra's arms, all those sentences shattered. Simone was 7 then. She wore a yellow jacket, her hair in 2 uneven braids, holding a stuffed animal with one worn ear. She looked over her mother's shoulder, searching for her father the way she always did after a deployment. Kendra knelt in front of her daughter, her right arm still heavily bandaged. She had just pulled a grown man out of rubble and driven through a kill zone. But in front of Simone's question, she almost couldn't breathe. "Mommy, why didn't Dad come back with everyone?" No one trains you to answer that. No procedure, no tactical principle, no sentence is right enough to place in a 7-year-old's ears. Kendra held her daughter very tight. She said Daddy had stayed behind so other people could come home. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that sometimes the ones who stay behind don't choose death beautifully. Sometimes they simply run out of time. Kendra never told that story. Not because she wanted to forget. She didn't believe people could forget things like that. She didn't tell it because telling it wouldn't change the ending. Marcus still wouldn't step off any plane. Simone would still grow up with an empty chair at school performances. Darius would still live with a scarred leg and a debt he didn't know how to repay. And Kendra would still have to wake up, sign papers, raise her daughter, build a company, and not let anyone turn her pain into a cheap anecdote. After he recovered, Darius left the military. His leg worked again, but never the same way. He became a bodyguard because it was a job his body still understood. Watch the door, read the crowd, and place himself between danger and the person paying him. But deep down, he knew the paycheck wasn't the only reason he stayed in that line of work. He started a small fund with a few former teammates to help the families of those who didn't come home. At first, it was just a few $1,000s, sent to a widow late on rent, a child who needed tuition, and a father who needed airfare to his son's memorial. Then the fund grew a little. Darius took more contracts, worked longer shifts, and stood behind men like Xander Croft for longer than he wanted, because every month there was still a list of families he needed to send money to. On that list was Marcus Walsh's family. He never told the story at veteran bar nights, because every time he told it, he heard the wheels of Kendra's vehicle turning back into the dust, and he heard his own heartbeat. Darius knew Marcus's name, knew he was the husband of the woman who had saved him, knew Simone was his daughter. But he didn't know Kendra had been the largest source of money flowing into that same fund for 5 years. Kendra had funded it anonymously from the other side of the same loss, through intermediary organizations, never letting her name appear. She didn't want gratitude to become a public debt. She only wanted the ones left behind to be held up a little, because Marcus had believed in that before she did. So inside Halcyon, when Kendra's sleeve rode up and the dagger crossed over a flame appeared on her right forearm, Darius didn't see ink. He saw pale blue sky through a broken roof, a vehicle turning back, and the woman who had pulled him out of the dirt when every calculation said he should be left there. He saw a debt that 8 years of bodyguard pay, 8 years of bowing his head to rich men, and 8 years of silence in hotel hallways could never repay. That was why his hand dropped. That was why he took exactly 2 steps back. That was why he gave a military salute to a woman in an old jacket soaked with coffee. Not because she was rich, not because he was afraid, but because in a soldier's life, some orders are written in contracts and some are carved into bone. The present returned with the bell over the glass door as 2 local police officers walked into Halcyon. The one in front was an officer in his 40s, with the face of someone used to downtown calls. Xander Croft immediately got some color back in his face. He walked toward the officer like a homeowner greeting a plumber, pointed at Kendra, and said she was causing a disturbance, refusing to leave a private area, threatening company contracts, and inciting his bodyguard to disobey orders. The officer looked at Kendra, at the broken cup pieces, at the red mark on her cheek, then at Darius, who was still standing nearby, silent but no longer belonging to Xander's side. He was about to ask his first procedural question. Kendra didn't interrupt, didn't stand, didn't tell anyone she had just been slapped, didn't ask anyone to testify. She only reached into her jacket pocket, took out a black metal card, and placed it on the coffee-wet table. The card wasn't large. It didn't shine. It rested beside the coffee stain like something too heavy to need to prove itself. The officer picked it up. He read the first line, then read it again. His eyes moved to the authentication code, the security seal, the title. The color of his face changed very slightly, but in a silent room, that small change was enough for everyone to see. He looked at Kendra, looked back at the card, then placed it on the table with both hands, more gently than he had picked it up. He turned to Xander. His voice was no longer the voice of someone handling a disruptive customer. It was low, flat, and careful. "Mr. Croft, I'd advise you to call your personal attorney. Right now." Xander froze. He asked what the hell that meant, then shouted, asking who the officer worked for. The question came out like the reflex of a man who believed every human being belonged to some chain of power that could be bought, called, or threatened. The officer didn't answer. He only looked at Kendra once more, as if confirming that she didn't need him to speak for her, then turned and walked out of the cafe. The glass door closed behind him with a very small sound, But to Xander, it was the first sound of another door beginning to lock. For a few minutes after the officer left Halcyon, Xander Croft still stood in the middle of the cafe like a man who hadn't accepted gravity yet. The glass door had closed. The rain outside returned to its steady rhythm, but the air inside was no longer the air of a Saturday morning. It had thickened, making it harder to breathe, as everyone began to understand that the slap wasn't going to end with an apology or a disturbance report. Xander looked at the black metal card on the table, looked at the coffee soaking into Kendra's old jacket, looked at Darius, who was still standing nearby with a silence that couldn't be bought. What he hated most wasn't Kendra's silence. He hated that no one in the room looked at her anymore like a woman sitting in the wrong place. The eyes had changed direction, power had changed direction, and Xander felt that before he understood it. He said Howard Park was on his way. 3 lawyers were coming too. 2 board members were being called. His voice tried to get loud again, tried to turn the room back into a place he could control with names and procedures. He said Kendra would regret daring to touch technologies. He said K Global couldn't unilaterally terminate a contract over a misunderstanding in a coffee shop. Kendra didn't answer. She only picked up a broken piece of the cup near the edge of the table and set it aside so Mila wouldn't step on it. The movement was so small it almost felt absurd in the middle of a corporate crisis. But to Darius, it made his throat tighten. 8 years earlier, she had done small things like that in the middle of chaos too, checking straps, keeping his head away from debris, and telling him to breathe on her count. The person truly in control of a situation rarely needed to take up all the sound in the room. 18 minutes later, Howard Park's group walked in. First came 3 lawyers in gray suits, leather bags in hand, faces tight as if they had been pulled away from family breakfast. Behind them were 2 Croft Technologies board members, a silver-haired woman and a younger man, both wearing the expressions of people used to handling scandals with clean language. Howard Park came last. He was 62, with shoulders slightly rounded, close-cropped gray hair, and he looked more tired than the others, but his eyes were still sharp. Xander immediately pointed straight at Kendra. He said she had fabricated authority, threatened a strategic contract, disrupted company operations, and might have staged the whole thing for extortion. He demanded that the lawyers prepare an emergency lawsuit, request a temporary restraining order, and protect the company from an intentional act of sabotage. Every sentence he spoke was trying to replace the simple truth that he had just slapped a customer in front of a crowd. Howard was halfway across the room when he got a clearer look at Kendra. He stopped mid-step. The color of his face changed very slightly, not enough for Xander to notice right away, but enough for Kendra to see. Howard Park knew her. Not personally, but enough. At board level, the name Kendra Walsh wasn't unfamiliar. K Global Security protected major corporations, data centers, and logistics routes far more sensitive than anything Croft Technologies had. Howard had once sat across from her in a closed-door meeting 2 years earlier, where Kendra had spoken less than anyone else and still made every security decision afterward pass through her. He didn't speak right away. Kendra noticed that. Howard looked around the cafe, looked at the broken cup, looked at the security camera in the upper left corner, looked at the red mark on Kendra's cheek, looked at Darius standing beside her table instead of behind Xander. Then he looked at the diners trying to pretend they weren't watching, even though a few phones had been raised far too high to be accidental. Howard slowly sat down in the chair across from Kendra. He didn't apologize, didn't greet her, didn't defend her. That silence had its own weight. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't courage yet either. Sometimes the people with the most moral power in a room take too long to use it. One of Xander's lawyers set his bag on the table, introduced himself, then asked Kendra to confirm her representative authority for K Global. Kendra opened the backpack with the worn strap at her feet. From inside, she took out a slim laptop and a small folder. No one in the cafe had been prepared for that image. A woman in an old jacket, her cheek still red from being slapped, calmly opening a laptop as if she were beginning an executive presentation. She didn't project it onto a large screen. She didn't need to. She opened the contract document on her laptop, then turned her phone toward the lawyers and enlarged the highlighted section. Clause 14B in the Strategic Security Services Agreement between K Global Security and Croft Technologies. Her voice was low and clear with no extra emotion. Any conduct by the CEO documented as physical assault, harassment, or public discriminatory behavior shall permit K Global to terminate the agreement unilaterally without liability for breach penalties. The cafe grew even quieter. No one needed to understand every line of contract language to recognize the words terminate and without penalty. Xander's youngest lawyer bent down to read more carefully. The woman on the board raised a hand to her mouth. Howard Park closed his eyes for 1 second, like a man hearing confirmation of what he had suspected from the moment he walked in. Kendra looked at Xander's lawyer. She asked if he wanted to read it again. The question wasn't loud, but it made Xander's face redden. He wasn't used to being turned into an outsider inside his own crisis. He cut in, saying the clause couldn't apply because she had provoked him, because the area had been reserved, because she refused to leave when asked, because Darius had betrayed his protective duty. He gave too many reasons at once, and the number of them made each one weaker. Kendra waited until he finished. Then she asked very simply, "Who slapped whom?" No one answered right away. No one needed to. The question wasn't asking for information. It reset the axis of the room. Xander could talk about contracts, lawyers, damages, and reputation, but the first fact still sat there. A CEO had hit a woman drinking coffee because he thought she didn't belong at the table he wanted. Some people spend their whole lives being judged by what they wear or instead they are. Kendra had stayed still under that slap, not because she couldn't do anything else, but because she knew exactly what she was going to do next. Stay with this story, because the most important part hasn't even begun. Xander turned to his lead lawyer in order to countersuit. He said Kendra had no proof he had done anything. The second that sentence came out, several people in the cafe lifted their heads as if they couldn't believe they had heard him correctly. Mila stood behind the counter, her face white. The man at the table near the door lowered his phone, then raised it again. A middle-aged couple looked at each other, both realizing they had seen everything from beginning to end. Kendra wasn't in a hurry. She looked around the cafe. 30 diners. 8 employees. A security camera in the upper left corner of the ceiling. A smaller camera aimed toward the register. The glass door was reflecting part of her table. At least 4 personal phones are recording. Darius had witnessed it. Howard Park had seen the direct aftermath, and on the table were still the broken cup pieces, the jacket soaked with coffee, and the red mark on her cheek. She said she didn't need evidence of her own. One short sentence, but to the legal team, it was the most dangerous sentence so far, because the best evidence wasn't something Kendra had brought with her. It was something Xander had created in a room with too many eyes, too many cameras, and too many people afraid of being dragged into false testimony. A lawsuit could take time. But a 10-second video of a CEO slapping a black woman in a coffee shop could move stocks, partners, and the board faster than any courtroom. Xander realized part of that. He immediately changed direction, saying no one was allowed to release any video, that this was image property connected to a private individual and a business entity, and that anyone who posted it would face legal consequences. His threats flew into the cold air. The cafe no longer heard him as a man with power. They heard him as a man trying to scoop spilled water back up with his hands. At that moment, Darius lowered his hand from the salute. No one asked him to. Kendra didn't order him. He reached into the pocket of his black suit jacket and took out his Croft Security Access employee card with his name on it. For months, that card had opened executive floors, private garages, secure elevators, and meeting rooms. Xander passed through without remembering the name of the man at the door. Darius looked at it for 1 second, then placed it on the table in front of Xander. He said he quit. Xander snapped his head toward him, as if this betrayal offended him more than Clause 14b. He said Darius couldn't do that. Darius looked directly at him for the first time since recognizing Kendra. His voice was low, not shouting, not shaking. He said, "I just did." Then he pulled out a chair and sat down on Kendra's side of the table. That movement made the whole room understand what words no longer needed to explain. Darius was no longer Xander's bodyguard. He wasn't making himself Kendra's new bodyguard either. He sat there as a witness, an old soldier, a man who had chosen the side of a debt no salary could price. Kendra glanced toward him. She didn't thank him out loud, but her eyes rested there long enough for Darius to know she had received it. Xander lost another layer of control. He called Darius ungrateful, said Croft had paid him more than any other company, and said he had just destroyed his own career in executive protection. Darius didn't answer. Some words only have power while the listener still wants to prove something. Darius no longer to prove anything to Xander. Howard Park finally placed both hands on the table. He looked at Darius's employee card, looked at clause 14B on the screen, looked at Xander, who was trembling with anger, not fear. Then he looked at Kendra. In his eyes, there was something almost like shame, but not yet enough to become an apology. Xander grabbed at that moment like a drowning man reaching for the edge of a board. He barked Howard's name, told him to say something, and asked what he was here for. Reminded Howard that he had built Croft Technologies from 12 employees, that everyone on the board had benefited from the contracts he brought in, and that one small misunderstanding couldn't be allowed to become a leadership crisis. Howard looked at Xander for a long time, long enough that Xander's anger began to lose its footing. Then Howard looked down at his own hands. The hands of a man who had sat through too many meetings, signed too many minutes, and stayed quiet too many times because he believed. Silence was how you protected the company. Today, that silence had brought him into a coffee shop where his CEO had slapped a woman and called lawyers before he called his conscience. He placed his phone on the table, dialed a number. When the person on the other end answered, Howard said he needed to convene an emergency board meeting. 48 hours, full attendance, no proxy absences. It involved the CEO, material contract risk, and an ethics clause. Xander's face went pale. He said Howard's name, this time not as an order but as a warning. Howard didn't look at him immediately. He ended the call, set the phone down, then turned toward him. A voice was low and tired but clear. "Sit down, Xander." Those two words made the room go completely still. Not because Howard had raised his voice, because for the first time that morning, someone from Xander's own world had said to him the thing he usually said to other people. Stop. Sit down. Not everything belongs to you. Xander didn't sit. But he didn't step forward anymore either. He stood in the middle of the cafe, surrounded by his own lawyers, his own board members, his own former bodyguard, witnesses who didn't belong to him, and the woman he had just slapped but no longer knew what to call. Kendra closed the laptop. She didn't need to say more. The clause had been read. The evidence was present. Darius had chosen. Howard had called the meeting. All that remained was time, the thing arrogant people hate most when it no longer runs according to their will. Outside the glass, Seattle rain kept falling lightly. On the tabletop, Darius's employee card lay beside Howard's phone, the broken cup pieces in Kendra's black metal card. 4 very small objects. But that morning they were enough to mark the beginning of the longest 48 hours of Xander Croft's career. The longest 48 hours of Xander Croft's career didn't begin with shouting inside Halcyon. They began with an email. At 11:17 Saturday morning, while black coffee was still spread across the tabletop and the broken cup pieces hadn't all been cleared by the staff, the phones of all 3 Croft Technologies lawyers buzzed at the same time. Not a personal message, not a media alert. It was an official notice from K Global Security's legal department sent to the correct contract addresses, in the correct format, with the correct digital signature, in language so cold no one could call it emotional. K Global was activating Clause 14B. Kendra Walsh didn't read the email out loud. She didn't need to. Xander's lead lawyer read it first, then stayed silent longer than a lawyer should. The second lawyer leaned down to look at his screen. The third opened the stored contract copy to compare the language. No one found a formatting error. No one found an immediate loophole. The clause sat there clear as a steel door that had already shut the moment Xander swung his hand. According to the notice, Croft Technologies' entire security system, access management, data monitoring, logistic protection, and executive security support would move into hold status after 24 hours. Not an immediate lockout, not system destruction, not data seizure. Nothing Xander's lawyers could call a corporate attack. K Global would simply stop expanded services, preserve data under its legal obligations, and hand off operations through the emergency transition process written into the contract. On paper it sounded civilized. In reality, everyone in the industry knew hold meant paralysis on a countdown. Croft Technologies hadn't hired K Global just to place a few security guards in the lobby. K Global protected the secondary data center, equipment delivery routes, lab access authentication, executive travel schedules, and data breach response protocols. When that system moved into hold, the doors would still open legally on the first day, but everyone would have to ask whether the keys would still work tomorrow. Xander didn't understand the whole impact right away. He understood money, reputation, and investor narratives. But he didn't understand the real operating body of his own company. He turned to his lawyer and asked if they could block the email. The lawyer only said they would need to review emergency measures, but the clause had been accepted by Croft when they signed the expanded agreement last quarter. Howard Park sat across the table, his face unchanged. One finger tapping slowly on the arm of the chair, Kendra stood. She wiped coffee from her sleeve with the paper towel Mila gave her. Darius stood beside the table, his employee card still lying in front of Xander like a resignation that can be taken back. Kendra told the lawyers that full written confirmation would be sent within 1 hour, along with the incident record and a preservation request for the cafe's camera footage. Then she closed the laptop. Xander tried to block her path with his voice more than his body. He said she couldn't walk out after sabotaging a public company. Kendra looked at him for a moment, then said she hadn't sabotaged anything. She had only enforced the contract Croft itself had signed. If he had a problem with the ethics clause, he should ask the person who approved it. Howard lowered his eyes. That was the first layer of truth. Objects, documents, clauses, emails, the black metal card, Darius's employee card left on the table. Things that didn't need emotion to exist. Xander could shout, make calls, and threaten lawsuits, but an email sent through the right system wasn't afraid of him. A contract didn't blush when insulted. A clause didn't withdraw itself just because a CEO felt embarrassed. Over the next 24 hours, Croft Technologies tried to outrun the news. The communications team sent out a draft internal statement calling the incident at Halcyon a personal misunderstanding under review. The legal department instructed the cafe to preserve camera footage. One senior manager suggested saying Xander had been provoked. That suggestion died within 3 minutes when a lawyer pointed out that if the video had sound, the word provoked would make the company look ridiculous both in court and in public. Xander didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse overlooking Seattle and called everyone he believed still owed him something: an investor, 2 partners, a media advisor, and a reporter who had once praised him. Every call began with certainty and ended with "let me see what I can do." For the first time, Xander felt the distance between being flattered and being protected. On Sunday morning, the second layer of truth entered not through email but through an article. The Wall Street Journal reported that K Global Security had terminated its strategic contract with Croft Technologies under an ethics clause related to public conduct by CEO Xander Croft at a Seattle coffee shop. The article didn't call Kendra a legend. It didn't tell the story of the tattoo. It only stated what the market needed to hear. A critical security partner was pulling out. The cause was directly tied to the CEO, and the board had called an emergency meeting. The reporter didn't get the video from Kendra. They didn't need to. A customer near the counter had sent in the clip. Halcyon's security camera confirmed the angle. 2 cafe employees provided anonymous accounts. The video wasn't long. Just a few seconds were enough to show Xander leaning down, saying something, then slapping a black woman in an old jacket while she sat still. Then came the shot of his bodyguard seeing the tattoo, stepping back and giving a military salute. Social media did the rest faster than any crisis response team could. But what scared the board wasn't online outrage. Outrage could fade. Memes could move on. The frightening part was the emails from partners. At 9:30 a.m., Croft's largest logistics partner requested an emergency meeting to evaluate operational risk if K Global moved the contract into hold. At 10:12, an investment fund sent a letter demanding an explanation about the potential loss of data security control. At 11, an enterprise client in Vancouver paused negotiations. Before noon, Croft Technology stock had lost 12% in morning trading, and even though the main market hadn't fully opened, the pre-market indicators were already enough to turn the finance team's screens red. From a temporary office, Howard Park read each update without saying much. He had sat through many crises before: defective products, leaked emails, and labor lawsuits. But this time, the root wasn't a broken process. It was the character of the person in charge. And there was no software patch for a CEO who believed he had the right to hit someone because he wanted her table. Xander still wouldn't admit he was wrong. At a meeting with lawyers on Sunday night, he said Kendra had exploited the contract for legal extortion, that private conduct couldn't erase 10 years of building a company, that Darius had been manipulated by old military trauma, and that Howard needed to remember who had taken Croft public. Not once did he say, "I slapped her." That was the sign that finally made Howard stop hoping Xander could save himself. 48 hours after Halcyon, the boardroom on the 42nd floor of Croft Technologies held all 9 board members. On the table were the legal files, Clause 14B, the Operational Impact Report, letters from 3 major partners and the Emergency Valuation Review. Kendra wasn't there. She didn't need to be. K Global had sent the file, confirmed the timeline, and requested handoff under the contract. Her absence proved this wasn't a personal confrontation. This was procedure. Xander walked in 3 minutes late, no apology. He wore a black suit, a dark blue tie, his face slightly pale but his chin still lifted. Behind him was the lead lawyer. Darius no longer stood behind him. That detail made the room feel empty in a way everyone noticed, but no one said out loud. Howard opened the meeting. His voice was low and dry. He laid out the timeline. The incident at Halcyon, Xander's call requesting legal support, Howard's presence at the cafe, Clause 14B being activated, the 24-hour hold notice, the media response, the market response, and the emergency meeting requests from partners. Every point came with documentation. Then Howard stopped. He looked around the table, and for the first time he said what he should said inside the cafe. He confirmed that he had been present at Halcyon. He confirmed that he had seen the red mark on Kendra Walsh's cheek, the broken coffee cup, the frightened witnesses. He confirmed that Darius Cole had resigned on the spot and sat on Ms. Walsh's side. He confirmed that Xander had not denied the act in front of the lawyers and had instead demanded a countersuit. He didn't decorate anything. He simply placed the truth on the table, layer by layer, until no one could pretend they hadn't seen it. One board member asked Howard why he hadn't spoken up immediately at the cafe. The question made the room sag. Howard looked at the file in front of him, then said he didn't have a good answer. He had judged the situation as a business risk before he looked at it as a moral wrong. That had been his failure. But that failure couldn't be a reason to keep failing for another 48 hours. Xander let out a short laugh. He called that a beautiful little speech to save Howard's own dignity. Then he stood up and placed both hands on the table. His speech came like the final act of a man who didn't understand why he had lost. He said he had built this company from nothing. When plenty of people still doubted the market, he signed the first customer, raised the first round, slept on the office floor, and pulled Croft from an idea into a billion-dollar business. One split-second decision couldn't erase 10 years of that. He said Kendra was using the contract for legal blackmail, and the board was letting it happen because it was afraid of the press. He said no court would support a partner destroying a contract for personal reasons. No admission, no apology. Not once did he call Kendra by name. When he finished, the room didn't explode into debate. That was the part that bothered him most. The board's silence no longer sounded like hesitation. It sounded like a decision waiting to be read aloud. The board's independent counsel laid out the grounds for removing a CEO under the harmful conduct clause. Severe reputational risk, loss of a critical partner, direct impact on shareholders, and public behavior inconsistent with Croft Technologies' leadership standards. Then came the clause allowing the company to forfeit unvested equity awards if an executive was removed for harmful conduct. Xander sat down, not because Howard told him to, because his legs slowed. The vote took place through the internal system, each member confirming their identity. 7 votes in favor of removal, 2 votes against, no abstentions, 7-2. Howard didn't look at Xander when the result appeared on the screen. He looked at the document in front of him, like a man who understood that a company wasn't saved by shielding the person who had turned it into a risk. The decision was effective immediately. Xander Croft was removed as CEO. Temporary operating authority transferred to the Emergency Leadership Committee. His unvested equity awards were suspended and sent into the clawback process under the harmful conduct provision. Xander shot to his feet. This time he didn't have a speech. Only fragments. "You'll regret this. I'll sue. This company is mine." No one answered. A lawyer touched his elbow lightly, trying to get him out before he created another record. When the boardroom door closed behind Xander, there was no applause. No one felt this was a beautiful victory. A company had just been forced to cut away its founder because he believed he was larger than the standard the company itself had signed. Corporate justice rarely looks like thunder. It looks like a chain of signatures, minutes, clauses, and numbers forcing a powerful man to stand in front of a limit. Kendra appeared only after the meeting in the executive hallway. She had come to sign the temporary transition agreement with the new leadership committee, still in the old jacket, still no watch. Her right forearm was fully covered. If someone didn't know the story, they might have thought she was a consultant waiting for a meeting room. Howard met her at the end of the hallway, where the glass looked down over the city. The rain had stopped, but the Seattle sky was still gray. He stood in front of her, with no lawyer, no secretary, looking far older than he had on Saturday morning. He said he was sorry he hadn't spoken up right away. Kendra looked at him. She could have said many things. She could have said his eye silence had been part of the room too. She could have said one act of protection at the right moment was worth more than a board meeting 48 hours later. But she also knew people aren't always brave in the first second. Sometimes they only get the chance to do right after failing the first time. She said he had done his job afterward. Nothing more was needed. Howard nodded. Forgiveness wasn't fully given, but it wasn't refused either. He walked away more slowly than he had arrived. Kendra stayed alone in the empty hallway, watching him disappear around the glass corner. For the first time since the beginning of the story, she pulled out her phone not to call legal, not to activate a contract, not to manage a crisis. Her fingers stopped over one very short name in her contacts. Simone. She didn't press call yet. She only looked at the name on the screen. In that quiet moment after 48 loud hours, power, contracts, stock prices, boardrooms, and the media all moved into the background. What remained was a mother standing in a hallway, about to call the only thing she truly wanted to protect. Kendra Walsh stood alone in the glass hallway on the 42nd floor after Howard Park walked away. Outside, the rain had just stopped over Seattle. Water still clung to the windows in long streaks, softening the buildings in the distance like an old photograph. Behind her, the boardroom was still filled with the sounds of people gathering, files, lawyers speaking quietly, doors opening and closing. But none of those sounds belonged to her anymore. She looked at Simone's name on the phone screen for a few more seconds. Over the past 48 hours, she had called legal, operations, the contract transition team, and the chief risk officer. Every call had been precise, necessary, as cold as a move on a control board. This was the only call she was making for herself. Simone picked up after 3 rings. Her voice still carried that 15-year-old quality, trying to sound grown while not quite hiding the worry underneath. Kendra asked if she had eaten dinner yet. Simone said not yet. She was waiting for her mother to come home. Then the girl went quiet for a beat and asked softly if Kendra was okay. Kendra looked down at the city. In the reflection of the glass, she saw the old jacket, the low-tied hair, a face a little more tired than it had been on Saturday morning. She had pulled a billion-dollar company into crisis procedure, ended a strategic contract, and caused a CEO to be removed. But Simone's question went straight through every layer of power and touched the most human part of her. She said she was okay. She said she'd be home soon. Simone didn't ask anything else. Maybe she had learned how to read her mother's silences the way other people read text messages. She only said she would heat up the soup. Kendra smiled very slightly, the kind of smile no one in the boardroom had seen. She said okay, but don't burn the pot like last time. Simone protested immediately, saying that one didn't count because the doorbell had distracted her. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but when Kendra hung up, the hallway no longer felt empty. 2 days later, Kendra returned to Halcyon. No lawyers, no Howard, no Xander. Just her, the old jacket that had been washed but still carried a faint coffee stain on the sleeve, and Darius Cole standing outside the cafe door like a man unsure whether he was allowed to step to the past a second time. Halcyon looked brighter than it had on the day of the incident. The rain had stopped. When Mila saw Kendra, she straightened, worry flickering in her eyes, then immediately set a cup of unsweetened black coffee on the counter. No one blocked their way this time. No one asked whether the area had been reserved. The corner table by the window was still there. The tabletop had been replaced, or at least polished so carefully that no trace of the broken cup remained. Kendra sat down in her usual spot. Darius sat across from her after one moment of hesitation. The man who had stood at attention and saluted her in the middle of the cafe now looked almost unsure what to do with his hands. Kendra pushed a cup of coffee toward him, black, no sugar. Darius looked at it, then gave a very quiet laugh. He said maybe she still remembered. Kendra said she remembered the things that needed remembering. For a long time, they only sat like that. Outside the window, pedestrians passed by. None of them knowing that at the corner table were 2 people who had survived the same night and neither had come out of it whole. Darius spoke first. He said that after leaving the military, he hadn't known what to do with the part of his life that had been given back to him. He became a bodyguard because the work was clear: stand between danger and the person paying. But the money, he said, had never only been about making his own life easier. He told her about the Veterans Fund. At first, it was only a few people. Every month, they pooled a little money and sent it to the families of teammates who hadn't come back. A wife who needed help with rent, a child who needed tuition, a father who needed a plane ticket to his son's memorial. Small amounts, not enough to change the world, but enough to keep a family from falling even further in the worst month of their lives. Darius stopped when he mentioned Marcus Walsh's family. He didn't look directly at Kendra. His voice slowed. He said that family had always been on the fund's priority list, not because they asked. They almost never asked for anything. But to him, that name was never just a line on a transfer. It was an empty space inside the vehicle that brought him home. Kendra placed both hands around her cup. She watched the steam rise from the coffee, thin and quick to vanish. Then she said she knew about that fund. She had been funding it anonymously for 5 years. Darius looked up. In his eyes surprise, then understanding, then a quiet kind of pain. He asked if she knew Marcus was. Kendra didn't make him finish. She said he was her husband. Yes. The silence after that was longer than any answer. No one else in the cafe could hear it, but to the two people at the corner table it was full of sound. An engine turning back, the withdrawal order, radio static, a 7-year-old girl asking why her father didn't come home with everyone. Darius lowered his head. His large hands tightened around the coffee cup until the knuckles stood out. He said he hadn't known. Kendra said she knew. She didn't say it to blame him, didn't say it to forgive him, didn't say Marcus had died because of him, because that wasn't the truth she wanted to place on the shoulders of a man who had already lived 8 years with his own debt. Marcus had stayed because he believed in what they had all sworn to. Kendra had saved Darius because she believed in it too. War had taken the rest in a way no one could negotiate with. Darius breathed in very slowly. He said if he had known, Kendra cut him off with a small shake of her head. Knowing wouldn't have changed anything. That was a sentence she had needed years to accept. Some truths arrive late not to fix the past, but to help the living stop inventing the wrong reasons to punish themselves. After a while, Kendra opened the envelope beside her backpack. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't thank you money. It was an official job offer from K Global Security. Title, Global Tactical Training Director. Darius read the line twice. Kendra said K Global needed who he was. Not the person he used to be on discharge papers. Not the bodyguard who knew how to stand behind a CEO. The person who understood what protection meant when there were no cameras, no contracts, no applause. He was better suited for it than anyone she had ever met. Darius asked about the salary. Kendra said 3 times what that other man had paid him. For the first time, Darius truly laughed, but the laugh faded quickly because his eyes were still red. He asked what would happen to the Veterans Fund. Kendra said K Global would sponsor it officially, no more anonymity. The fund would have accountants, legal support, a hiring network, a transition program for veterans, and support for the families of the fallen. Darius looked into his coffee. He said he needed to think about it. Kendra nodded. She said she knew. She didn't push. Important decisions shouldn't be forced out of someone just because the moment feels emotional. Darius's loyalty had never been something she wanted to collect like a debt. She had only opened a door. He had to choose whether to walk through it. 2 weeks later, K Global announced a new program for veterans transitioning into security, risk operations, and critical infrastructure protection. The program was called the Marcus Walsh Transition Program. The announcement was short. It didn't use the word legend. It didn't turn Marcus into a symbol for brand polish. It only said the program was created to carry forward one basic principle: leave no one behind. Kendra read the final announcement 3 times before approving it. Simone sat at the kitchen table doing homework and asked whether her mother was okay seeing her father's name there. Kendra didn't answer immediately. She looked at the name Marcus Walsh on the screen. For years, she had avoided letting his name be used as a story. But this time, his name wasn't standing on a wreath. It was standing over a doorway for people who still had to come back to ordinary life. So she said she thought Simone's dad would have liked it. 3 months later, Darius stood in front of K Global's first training class. He wore a simple black shirt, no Croft badge, no longer standing behind anyone. In front of him were 24 veterans of different ages, some still carrying the straight posture of military life, some sitting slightly crooked from old injuries, all of them wearing the faces of people not yet sure civilian life had a place for them. Darius didn't begin with the training manual. He looked at the class and said, protection didn't mean obeying the person who paid the most. Protection meant knowing what must not be left behind. Someone in the class looked down and wrote it down. Someone else looked up as if he had just heard the exact sentence he had needed for years. In the back row, Kendra sat with a cup of black coffee in her hand, still in the old jacket, still no watch. Simone sat beside her, looking around K Global's real training room, where her mother had brought her for the first time not as a secret, but as part of her life. The girl looked at the tattoo on Kendra's right forearm when her sleeve slipped back, then looked at the words Marcus Walsh Transition Program on the screen at the front. Simone didn't ask anything. She only slipped her hand through her mother's arm. Kendra let it stay there. After the class, Simone asked Darius what her father had been like. Darius looked at Kendra first, waiting for one tiny nod. Then he said Marcus was the kind of man who checked everyone else's straps before checking his own. The kind of man who told terrible stories, but still tried to make the team laugh on the worst nights. The kind of man who believed coming home wasn't just about surviving, but about carrying the dignity of the people who couldn't walk out on their own. Simone listened without crying. She only looked at the board with her father's name on it for a little longer. Kendra placed a very gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. There are stories about power that make people think it has to come with cars, major contracts, falling stock prices, and boardroom votes. But if you look closely, the real power in this story didn't begin in a boardroom. It began at a corner table where a plainly dressed woman was judged unworthy of staying seated. Xander Croft thought the slap would make him taller. All it really did was show how small he was. People like Xander often confuse noise with power. They think giving loud orders means control. They think a bodyguard means loyalty. They think a contract is permission to look down on other people. But real power doesn't need to hit anyone in the face to prove it exists. It can sit still, drink black coffee, keep its phone in its pocket, and speak only when it knows exactly what needs to be activated. Darius showed something else money can't buy. He had a high-paying job. He had position. He had a boss who thought everything around him could be replaced. But the moment Darius saw that tattoo, he remembered who he was before he remembered who he worked for. He didn't need Kendra to give him an order. He didn't need a new contract. He didn't need to know how rich or powerful she was. He only knew the person in front of him had once turned back when everyone else had to leave. Loyalty like that isn't signed in ink. It's signed in blood, loss, and character. And Kendra. The most important thing to remember about her isn't that she owns K Global, or that she could end a contract strong enough to shake Croft Technologies. What matters is that, after everything, the call that softened her most was still the one to her daughter. Have you eaten dinner? I'll be home soon. Power didn't take away the human part of her. If anything, it helped her protect that part better. And Marcus, the man who never appeared in the coffee shop, was still at the center of this story. Not like a tragic ghost, but like a principle that kept living. Leave no one behind. A simple sentence, but once it steps outside a slogan, it asks people to pay a very real price. Turn the vehicle back, pull someone out, live with the person who didn't come home, then use the rest of your life helping others find their way back. If you believe loyalty and gratitude will always be stronger than all the arrogant money in the world, leave a comment below with the words "real power." Don't forget to like and subscribe to Single Mom Billionaire Story so we can keep spreading powerful values like this. I wish you a peaceful evening, and always remember to respect the people around you. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who has walked through the most fire.